My name is Hannah, and I'm 32. I'm sitting on my porch in a quiet Ohio town, coffee in hand, watching my son, Lucas, just 6, play with his toy trucks. His laughter fills the air, but my heart carries a weight. My mother-in-law, Margaret, once my closest ally, turned on me, saying I wasn't fit to raise him. She pushed for a custody hearing that shook my world. But in that courtroom, Lucas's small voice silenced everyone. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? I'd love to know where you're watching from. If this resonates, please like and subscribe to hear how my son's words changed everything. The smell of lasagna filled my apartment warm and comforting as I set the table for 3. It was a chilly November evening, and I'd spent hours cooking, hoping to smooth things over with Margaret. Lucas, my 6-year-old, was sprawled on the living room floor, coloring a picture of a rocket ship. I glanced at him, his tongue poking out in concentration, and felt a pang of pride. This dinner wasn't just about food. It was my attempt to mend the growing rift between me and my mother-in-law ever since Daniel, my ex-husband, flaked on Lucas's birthday last month. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could find common ground again. I smoothed my apron, checking the oven one last time. The doorbell rang, and Lucas bolted up, shouting, "Grandma's here." I opened the door to Margaret, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her smile polite but thin. She hugged Lucas, ruffling his hair, and handed me a bottle of red wine. "Thought this might go with dinner, Hannah," she said, her voice clipped. I thanked her, ignoring the slight edge in her tone, and ushered her inside. We sat at the table, the lasagna steaming in the center. Lucas chattered about his school project, a diorama of the solar system, and I beamed, proud of his enthusiasm. Margaret nodded along, but her eyes kept flicking to me like she was sizing me up. "He's so bright," she said, cutting into her food. "Must take after his father." I forced a laugh, brushing off the jab. Daniel hadn't been bright enough to show up for his son lately, but I didn't say that. I wanted peace tonight. As I served seconds, Margaret leaned back, her fork tapping the plate. "Hannah, you're working those long shifts again, aren't you?" she asked, her tone too casual. I froze, my hand on the serving spoon. "Well, yeah," I said, keeping my voice light. "Nursing doesn't exactly let you pick your hours. But I make it work for Lucas." She raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine. "Must be hard leaving him with sitters so much. Kids need stability, you know." My stomach twisted, but I swallowed the retort. She knew I couldn't afford to cut back hours. The hospital was understaffed, and I was pulling doubles to cover rent and Lucas's school supplies. I glanced at Lucas, who was oblivious, munching on garlic bread. "I'm there for him," I said firmly. "Every night, I'm the one tucking him in." Margaret's lips pursed, and she didn't respond. Just cut another bite of lasagna. The conversation shifted to Lucas's school, and I thought we'd dodged the tension. Then Lucas reached for his juice, and his elbow knocked the glass over. Orange liquid spilled across the tablecloth, soaking into the fabric. "Oh no!" he gasped, his eyes wide. I grabbed a napkin, laughing it off. "It's just juice, buddy. No big deal." But Margaret's voice cut through, sharp and sudden. "He needs more discipline, Hannah. Boys his age shouldn't be so careless." The room went quiet. Lucas's face fell, and he shrank into his chair. I stared at Margaret, my heart pounding. "It was an accident," I said, my voice low but firm. "He's 6. She didn't back down, her eyes locked on mine. "Accidents happen when there's no structure. He's running wild." I felt heat rise in my chest, but Daniel, who'd been silent, cleared his throat. "Mom, let's talk about something else," he said, his voice weak. Margaret sighed, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, but the air felt thick, heavy. I cleaned the spill, my hands shaking, and steered the talk to neutral ground. asking Margaret about her garden. She answered curtly, her warmth gone. After dinner, she hugged Lucas tightly, whispering something I couldn't hear, and left without a word to me. Daniel mumbled an apology and followed her out. I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear, my chest tight with a mix of anger and confusion. Had I done something wrong? Was this about Daniel's absence, or was Margaret turning on me? Later, as I washed dishes, the quilt Margaret gave me for Lucas's birth caught my eye, draped over the couch. I'd cherished it, each stitch a reminder of her kindness back then. Now, it felt like a relic from a different life. I sank onto the couch, staring at the quilt, replaying her words. Stability. Discipline. They stung, not just because they were harsh, but because they echoed my own fears. Was I enough for Lucas? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered sharp and cold. The next morning, I met my coworker Sarah for coffee before our shift. She noticed my quiet mood and prodded gently. "You look like you carried the world home last night," she said, stirring her latte. I hesitated, then spilled everything Margaret's comments, the spilled juice the way her words cut deeper than I'd expected. Sarah listened, her brow furrowed. "Sounds like she's projecting," she said. "Maybe she's mad at Daniel, but taking it out on you. She's been off since her own divorce, right?" I nodded, sipping my coffee, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Margaret's divorce was years ago, but maybe Sarah was right. Still, why me? Why now? As I drove to pick up Lucas from school, my phone buzzed. It was Margaret asking about his after-school routine, her voice sugary but probing. "Just making sure he's settled," she said. I answered politely, but my grip on the steering wheel tightened. She'd never called like this before, not so often, not so pointedly. I hung up, my unease growing. Something was shifting, and I didn't know what. All I knew was I'd do anything to keep Lucas safe, even if I didn't yet understand the storm coming our way. The next few days felt like walking on eggshells. I kept replaying Margaret's call, her voice so sweet it made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, focusing on Lucas. That evening, I sat with him at the kitchen table, helping him glue glitter to his solar system diorama. His small fingers fumbled with the glue stick, and I laughed, wiping a smear off his cheek. "You're gonna make Jupiter sparkle, kiddo," I said, ruffling his hair. He grinned, but I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Margaret's questions about his routine felt like a test I hadn't studied for. At work, the hospital was chaos. A flu outbreak had us scrambling, and I was on my third 12-hour shift in a row. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I pushed through, checking charts and comforting patients. During a rare break, I called Lucas's babysitter, Jenna, to make sure he was okay. "He's fine, Hannah," she said. "Just ate a mountain of mac and cheese." I smiled, but my relief was short-lived. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Can I take Lucas to the park tomorrow? I need to see him." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. She'd never asked so directly before. I typed a quick reply saying I'd let her know and shoved the phone in my pocket. That night, I tucked Lucas into bed, his rocket ship pajamas glowing under the nightlight. He clutched his stuffed dinosaur, murmuring about planets. I kissed his forehead, whispering, "Love you to the moon and back." But as I closed his door, my mind raced. Margaret's sudden interest wasn't just grandmotherly love. It felt calculated, like she was building a case. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my temples. The quilt still lay there, its bright patches mocking me with memories of better days. I folded it up and stuffed it into a closet out of sight. The next morning, I dropped Lucas at school and headed to work, my head foggy. Sarah caught me in the break room refilling my coffee. "You look worse than yesterday," she said, half teasing. I sighed, leaning against the counter. Margaret's texting now, wanting to take Lucas out. It's weird, right? Sarah frowned, stirring sugar into her cup. Yeah, it's off. She's acting like she's auditing you. Maybe talk to Daniel. Get him to rein her in. I nodded, but the thought of confronting my ex made my stomach churn. Daniel barely answered my calls unless it was about his weekend visits, which he often canceled. I texted Daniel anyway, asking if he knew why his mom was so fixated on Lucas lately. His reply came hours later. She's just worried about him. Chill. I gritted my teeth, tossing the phone onto my locker shelf. Chill. He hadn't seen the way Margaret's eyes bored into me at dinner, like I was failing some unspoken standard. I wanted to scream, but I had patience waiting. I plastered on a smile and got back to work, my mind spinning. That evening, I picked Lucas up from Jenna's. He was bouncing with energy, telling me about a new game he'd played. I listened, forcing enthusiasm, but my thoughts were elsewhere. When we got home, I started dinner chopping carrots with more force than necessary. The knife slipped, nicking my finger, and I cursed under my breath, running it under cold water. Lucas looked up from his coloring book. You okay, Mommy? He asked, his brow furrowed. I nodded, faking a smile. Just a little cut, buddy. No biggie. But inside, I was unraveling. Margaret called again that night, her voice syrupy as ever. Hannah, I was thinking Lucas could spend the weekend with me. Give you a break. My grip on the phone tightened. A break I didn't need a break from my son. We've got plans, I said, keeping my tone even. Maybe another time. She paused, then said, He'd have fun with me, you know. I've got a big backyard toys he loves. I clenched my jaw, picturing her pristine house so different from my cluttered apartment. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up before she could push further. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from the pot of soup on the stove. My finger throbbed where I'd cut it, a small but sharp reminder of how off balance I felt. Margaret's calls, her texts, her comments at dinner, they were piling up, each one a brick in a wall I didn't know how to climb. I thought of Sarah's words about Margaret's divorce, how it might be fueling her behavior. But this felt personal, like she was targeting me, not just misplacing her pain. I called my sister Emily, needing her voice to ground me. She lived in Chicago, too far to drop by, but her no-nonsense tone always steadied me. She's overstepping, Hannah, Emily said after I filled her in. You need to set boundaries like yesterday. She's not his mom, you are. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and whispered, I know. But what if she's right? What if I'm not enough? Emily's voice softened. You're more than enough. Lucas adores you. Don't let her make you doubt that. I hung up, feeling a flicker of resolve, but it faded fast. As I checked on Lucas, already asleep with his dinosaur tucked under his arm, I felt a chill. Margaret's words echoed in my head. Stability, discipline, better. They weren't just criticism, they were a warning. I climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with a fear I couldn't name yet. Something was coming, something bigger than a spilled glass of juice or a tense dinner, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The hospital was a blur of beeping monitors and hurried footsteps, but my mind wasn't on the patients. It was on Margaret's last call, her insistence on taking Lucas for the weekend. Her words looping in my head like a broken record. I'd brushed her off, but the weight of her persistence clung to me. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after that tense dinner, and I was in the middle of a shift when my supervisor Linda pulled me into her office. Her face was tight, not her usual warm smile. Hannah, we need to talk, she said, closing the door. I sat my scrubs, still damp from a spilled IV bag, and braced myself. What's up? I asked, trying to sound calm. Linda folded her hands, her voice low. I got a call from Child Services. Someone filed a concern about Lucas's care. They're investigating you for neglect. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step on a staircase. Neglect, I choked out. Who would? But I knew. Margaret's face flashed in my mind, her sharp eyes at dinner, her probing texts. I gripped the chair, my knuckles white. Linda softened, but her words still stung. They're coming to your place tomorrow. I know you're a good mom, Hannah, but you need to be ready. I nodded, barely hearing her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Neglect. The word felt like a slap. I stumbled back to the ward, my hands shaking as I checked a patient's chart. I wanted to call Margaret to scream at her, but I had 3 more hours on my shift. I swallowed the rage and kept moving one foot in front of the other. That evening, I picked Lucas up from school. He was swinging his backpack, telling me about a new friend he'd made, but I could barely focus. At home, I made spaghetti, my hands mechanical as I stirred the sauce. Lucas sat at the table, drawing a picture of a dinosaur, oblivious to the storm inside me. I watched him, his crayons scratching the paper, and felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it scared me. No one was taking him from me. No one. The next morning, a woman named Karen from Child Services knocked on my door. She was in her 40s, her clipboard crisp, and her smile professional. Lucas was at school, thank God, but I felt exposed as she stepped inside. My apartment was clean, but it was small, the couch sagging, the carpet worn. Karen's eyes scanned everything, the stack of dishes in the sink, Lucas's toys scattered by the TV, the half-empty fridge. Just routine, she said, jotting notes. Routine? My life was being dissected. She asked about my work hours, Lucas's schedule, his diet. I answered calmly, explaining how I juggled nursing shifts to be there for him, how Jenna was a trusted sitter, how I read to him every night. But her pen kept moving, and every scratch felt like a judgment. Any family support, she asked. I hesitated, then said, his dad's around sometimes. His grandma, she helps. I didn't mention Margaret's betrayal. Not yet. Karen nodded, her face unreadable, and left me with a card and a promise to follow up. I closed the door, my legs weak, and slid to the floor, my back against the wall. I called Sarah, my voice shaking as I told her about the visit. She went through my fridge, Sarah. Like I'm starving him or something. Sarah cursed under her breath. This is Margaret, isn't it? She's lost it. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I need to talk to her, face to face. Sarah warned me to stay calm, but calm wasn't an option anymore. I hung up and paced the apartment, my anger building with every step. That afternoon, I drove to Margaret's house, a tidy brick home with roses lining the walkway. My heart pounded as I rang the bell. She opened the door, her apron dusted with flour, and for a second, she looked like the Margaret I'd once loved, the one who'd baked cookies with me when Daniel and I were engaged. Then her eyes hardened. Hannah, what's this about? She asked, stepping onto the porch. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but sharp. Did you call Child Services on me? Her lips tightened, and she crossed her arms. I did what I had to, she said, no hesitation. Lucas needs more than you're giving him. You're stretched thin, Hannah. I see it. He deserves better. Her words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. Better, I snapped. I'm his mother. I work myself to the bone for him. You think you can do better? She didn't flinch, her gaze cold. I know I can. I wanted to scream, to shake her, but I saw a neighbor glance our way, and I lowered my voice. You're crossing a line, Margaret. This isn't about Lucas. It's about you. She shook her head, almost pitying. You're wrong. It's all for him. She turned and went inside the door, clicking shut. I stood there. My fists clenched the locket Lucas made me heavy against my chest. I'd worn it every day since he gave it to me at school, a tiny anchor in this mess. But right now, it wasn't enough to keep me steady. I got in my car, my vision blurring with tears, and drove home, the weight of her words crushing me. She wasn't just questioning me. She was trying to take my son. I drove home from Margaret's, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, her words echoing like a drumbeat in my skull. Lucas deserves better. The sky was gray heavy with the promise of rain, and my chest felt just as weighed down. I pulled into my apartment complex, sat in the car, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to breathe. I wanted to call Emily to hear her tell me I was enough, but my phone stayed untouched in my purse. I was too raw, too afraid her reassurance would feel hollow. Inside, I checked on Lucas, who was at Jenna's, until I could pick him up. I sank onto the couch, staring at the stack of bills on the coffee table unopened. The locket around my neck felt heavier, its small weight a reminder of Lucas's trust in me. I unclasped it, holding it in my palm, tracing the tiny heart he'd scratched into it with a paperclip at school. I'd laughed when he gave it to me, calling it his superhero badge for me. Now it felt like the only thing tethering me to him. At work the next day, the hospital buzzed with its usual chaos, but I was a ghost, moving through rounds with a forced smile. My co-workers' chatter grated on me, their small talk about weekend plans, a stark contrast to the vice tightening around my life. During a lull, I overheard two nurses whispering in the break room, their voices low but clear. Heard Hannah's got child services on her. Poor kid. My face burned, and I backed away, pretending I hadn't heard. But the shame clung to me, sticky and suffocating. I'd worked so hard to be a good nurse, a good mom, and now my name was fodder for gossip. I called Emily that night, my voice barely above a whisper, as I sat on my bedroom floor, the door closed so Lucas wouldn't hear. She reported me. I said the words, spilling out. Child services came to my house. Margaret thinks I'm failing him. Emily's silence was worse than anything she could have said. Then, softly, she's wrong, Hannah. You're his whole world. But you've got to fight this. Don't let her win. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks, but fighting felt impossible when I was already so tired. The next day I took Lucas to school, forcing cheerfulness, as he showed me a new drawing, a bright blue whale swimming in a sea of stars. It's for you, Mommy, he said, his smile wide. I hugged him tightly, my throat burning, and promised to hang it on the fridge. But as I watched him run to his classroom, I felt a pang of dread. What if Margaret was poisoning his mind against me? What if he started believing her? That afternoon, I got a call from Lucas's teacher, Miss Clara. Her voice was warm, but there was an edge to it. Hannah, I wanted to let you know Lucas is doing great. His reading's ahead of the class, and he's so kind to his friends. I exhaled, grateful for the good news. But she continued. His grandmother stopped by today. She asked a lot of questions about his behavior, his attendance. I told her he's thriving, but it felt odd. My blood ran cold. Margaret had gone to his school without telling me. I thanked Miss Clara, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest, and hung up. I paced the apartment, my mind racing. Margaret wasn't just watching me, she was building a case piece by piece. I wanted to confront her again, to demand she stop, but the memory of her cold stare on her porch stopped me. She wasn't backing down, and I was running out of ways to push back without losing myself. That evening, I went to pick Lucas up from Margaret's house. She'd insisted on a short visit, and I'd agreed, hoping to keep the peace. When I arrived, the front door was open, and I heard her voice from the living room, soft but pointed. You'd have so much fun living here, Lucas. Grandma's got a big swing set, and we could bake cookies every day. My heart stopped. I stepped inside my shoes, silent on the hardwood, and saw Lucas on the couch, clutching a toy car, his eyes wide but uncertain. Margaret, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, her expression calm, almost smug. Oh, Hannah, we were just talking. Lucas ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs. Can we go home, Mommy? He asked, his voice small. I nodded, scooping him up, my eyes locked on Margaret. "Don't do this," I said low enough so Lucas wouldn't hear. She tilted her head, her smile thin. "I'm just giving him options." I walked out Lucas's weight, grounding me as I carried him to the car. Rain had started falling soft, but steady, blurring the streetlights. I buckled him in my hands, shaking, and climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, I saw his face, quiet and confused. "Is Grandma mad at you?" he asked. I forced a smile, my heart splintering. "No, buddy. She just loves you a lot." But inside, I was screaming. Margaret wasn't just coming for me, she was trying to pull Lucas away, and I didn't know how to stop her. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, its high ceiling amplifying every whisper. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. Lucas was beside me, swinging his legs under the chair, his small suit jacket slightly too big. My lawyer, Rebecca, shuffled papers, her face drawn from late nights preparing my case. Across the room, Margaret sat ramrod straight, her navy blazer crisp, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. I couldn't look at her without feeling my stomach churn. Judge Thompson entered, his black robe swishing, and the room stood. My heart pounded as we sat again, the air thick with anticipation. Rebecca had warned me this hearing could decide everything. Margaret was seeking full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother. The Child Services report, her testimony, her polished life, it all stacked against me. I touched the crumpled drawing in my purse, a sketch Lucas had made of us holding hands under a rainbow. It was my lifeline, a reminder of why I was here. Margaret's lawyer, a slick man with a sharp jaw, stood first. His voice was smooth-cutting. "Your Honor, Hannah is a single mother stretched beyond her limits. Her nursing shifts leave Lucas in the care of strangers for hours. She's missed school events, parent-teacher meetings, even doctor's appointments. The Child Services investigation, prompted by a concerned family member, found a home barely adequate for a child's needs." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Lucas needs stability structure, a guardian who can prioritize him. Margaret is that guardian." I felt every eye in the room on me, the weight of judgment pressing down. My cheeks burned, but I kept my head up, refusing to let them see me crumble. Rebecca scribbled notes, her pen scratching furiously, but I could tell she was struggling to counter his points. The Child Services report wasn't damning, but it wasn't glowing either. My long hours, my small apartment, my occasional late pickups, they'd been twisted into a portrait of neglect. Margaret took the stand, next, her voice steady but laced with a rehearsed tremble. "I love my grandson," she said, clutching a tissue. "But I've watched Hannah struggle. Lucas deserves a home where he's the focus, not an afterthought. I have the time, the resources, the love to give him everything." She glanced at me, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name, pity maybe, or triumph. I wanted to shout that I'd given Lucas everything, that my love for him was the reason I worked those grueling shifts, but my throat was too tight. Rebecca called me to testify. My legs shook as I walked to the stand, the courtroom blurring around me. I swore in my voice barely audible and faced the judge. His face was stern, unreadable, his glasses catching the light. "Miss Carter," Rebecca prompted, "tell us about your relationship with Lucas." I took a breath, my hands gripping the edge of the stand. "He's my world," I said, my voice cracking. "I work long hours because I have to, but I'm there for him. I read him stories, help with his homework, cheer at his soccer games when I can. I'm not perfect, but I love him more than anything." I poured out my heart, describing our mornings making pancakes, his laughter, when we played tag in the park, the way he'd crawl into my bed after a nightmare. But as I spoke, I saw the judge's expression shift, his brow furrowing. Margaret's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his questions like knives. "You missed Lucas's spring recital, correct? and his last pediatric checkup, I knotted my chest tight. I had to work, I said, but it sounded weak, like an excuse. He smirked, sitting down, and I returned to my seat, my hands trembling. Rebecca called Daniel next, my ex-husband, who'd barely spoken to me since the case began. He slouched to the stand, his tie loose, his eyes avoiding mine. "Mr. Carter," Rebecca asked, "do you believe Hannah is unfit?" Daniel shifted, clearing his throat. "She tries," he said, his voice flat, "but it's hard for her being alone. Mom's got more to offer Lucas." My breath caught, betrayal slicing through me. I'd begged him to support me, and here he was siding with Margaret, or at least refusing to fight for me. I stared at the floor, my vision blurring, the drawing in my purse forgotten. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his voice measured. "This is a serious matter. I've heard compelling arguments from both sides, but the child's welfare is paramount." He glanced at Margaret, then me, and I felt my world teetering. Rebecca whispered, "We're losing ground," her voice tense. I nodded, numb, my mind racing for something, anything to turn this around. Lucas tugged at my sleeve, his small voice breaking through. "Mommy, can I talk?" he asked, his eyes wide but determined. I froze, my heart in my throat, as he pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his hands steady in a way mine could never be. Lucas's small hand clutched the folded paper, his fingers smudged with pencil lead from hours of writing at school. I stared at him, my heart hammering, as he looked up at Judge Thompson with a mix of fear and resolve. "Can I read something?" he asked, his voice clear but soft, cutting through the courtroom's heavy silence. My breath caught, every muscle frozen. Rebecca hesitated, glancing at me, then nodded to the judge. "Your Honor, the child wishes to speak," she said, her tone cautious. Judge Thompson adjusted his glasses, his expression softening for the first time. "Go ahead, young man," he said, leaning forward. Lucas slid off his chair, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, and walked to the stand, the paper trembling slightly in his grip. I wanted to pull him back, to shield him from this room of strangers judging our lives, but his determined steps stopped me. He climbed onto the stand, barely tall enough to reach the microphone, and unfolded his letter. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own pulse. Margaret leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly, her face unreadable. Daniel shifted in his seat, his eyes on the floor. Lucas took a deep breath, his small chest rising, and began to read. "My name is Lucas Carter, and I'm 6. I wrote this because I want to stay with my mommy." His voice wobbled but grew stronger. "She works a lot, but she always comes home. She makes me laugh and helps me with my spelling. Grandma says I'd be better with her, but I don't want to leave my mommy. She loves me, and I love her." Each word hit me like a stone, tearing open every fear I'd buried. My eyes burned, tears spilling over as I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to stay silent. Lucas's voice, so small, yet so fierce, filled the courtroom, and I saw heads turn, jurors shifting, their faces softening. But Margaret's expression hardened, her lips a thin line, and I felt a chill. She wasn't moved, she was angry. My heart sank, the weight of her resolve crushing me anew. Lucas kept reading, his voice steady now. "Sometimes I'm scared when Mommy's at work, but she calls me every night to say goodnight. She's my best friend. I don't want a new home. I want our home." He paused, looking at me, his eyes bright with trust, and I choked back a sob. The drawing in my purse, the locket around my neck, they were nothing compared to this moment, my son standing up for us in a way I couldn't. But the fear clawed at me. Would it be enough? The judge's face was unreadable again, his pen poised over his notes. Margaret's lawyer stood, his voice sharp. Your Honor, while the child's statement is touching, it doesn't change the facts. A 6-year-old can't understand what's best for him. Mrs. Carter offers a stable, nurturing environment unburdened by the demands of a chaotic work schedule. His words sliced through Lucas's, dismissing them as childish, and I felt my chest tighten, rage and helplessness warring inside me. Rebecca tried to counter, her voice firm. Your Honor. Lucas's words show the strength of his bond with his mother. That's not something to dismiss. But the judge raised a hand, silencing her, and turned to Lucas. Thank you, son. You can sit down now. Lucas folded his paper, his shoulders sagging slightly, and walked back to me. I pulled him close, kissing his forehead, but my eyes were on the judge, searching for a sign, anything to tell me we weren't losing. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, his voice grave. This is a complex case. I've heard strong arguments, but I need to consider all evidence carefully. The child's statement is compelling, but I must weigh it against the documented concerns. My heart plummeted, the room spinning. Documented concerns. The Child Services report, Margaret's testimony. Daniel's weak defense, they were all stacking against me, and Lucas's brave words might not be enough. Margaret's gaze met mine, cold and unyielding, and I felt the ground slip away. I held Lucas's hand, his small fingers warm in mine. But inside, I was shattering. My son had bared his heart to save us, and it might not matter. The judge's pen scratched across his notes, each sound a hammer on my hope. I was drowning in this sterile room, my love for Lucas, the only thing keeping me upright, but it felt like it was slipping through my fingers, leaving me empty and broken. I left the courtroom, clutching Lucas's hand, his small fingers anchoring me as we stepped into the gray afternoon. My legs felt like jelly, the judge's words still ringing in my ears, his pause in the hearing a fragile lifeline. Lucas's letter had shaken the room, but it wasn't enough, not yet. I glanced down at him, his face pale but calm, and felt a spark ignite inside me. I'd been battered, humiliated, but I wasn't done. For Lucas, I'd fight with everything I had. Back at my apartment, I sat on the couch, Lucas curled up beside me with a book about planets. Rebecca called, her voice steady but urgent. Hannah, Lucas's statement changed things. The judge is listening, but we need more. Letters, witnesses, proof you're a fit mother. We've got a week before the next hearing. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, my mind already racing. I'd been reactive, defensive, letting Margaret's accusations bury me. No more. I started with Sarah. I met her at the hospital cafeteria the next morning. The clatter of trays and chatter, a stark contrast to the quiet resolve building in me. Over lukewarm coffee, I told her everything. The hearing, Lucas's letter, the judge's indecision. I need help, I said, my voice firm despite the knot in my chest. Can you talk to the staff? Anyone who's seen me with Lucas who knows I'm a good mom. Sarah's eyes lit up, her fork pausing midair. Absolutely. I'll get letters from everyone, nurses, aides, even Dr. Patel. We've all seen you juggle work, and Lucas like a pro. Her enthusiasm steadied me, but I felt a twinge of guilt. Asking for help meant admitting I couldn't do this alone, and that stung. Still, I pushed it aside. This wasn't about my pride, it was about Lucas. I thanked Sarah, squeezing her hand, and headed to my shift, a plan forming. At work, I moved with purpose, my exhaustion shoved to the back burner. Between patients, I jotted down names, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who could vouch for me. That evening, I drove to our church, a small brick building with stained glass windows that glowed in the dusk. Pastor James was in his office sorting hymnals, his warm smile a balm to my frayed nerves. I sat across from him, my hands twisting in my lap, and poured out the story, Margaret's campaign, the Child Services report, Lucas's brave stand. I need the congregation's support, I said, my voice catching. Prayers, letters, anything to show I'm enough for my son. Pastor James leaned forward, his eyes kind but fierce. Hannah, you're not just enough, you're extraordinary. I'll organize a prayer chain tonight, and I'll ask folks to write letters about you and Lucas. This church is your family. His words hit me hard, a lump rising in my throat. I'd always kept my struggles private, but now I saw strength in leaning on others. I thanked him, my voice thick, and left with a stack of blank cards he gave me for the congregation to fill with messages. At home, I tucked Lucas into bed, his eyelids heavy, as I read him a story about a brave astronaut. You were so brave today, I whispered, brushing his hair back. He smiled sleepily. I just told the truth, Mommy. I kissed his forehead, my heart swelling, and sat by his bedside until he drifted off. Alone in the living room, I pulled out a notebook and started writing a letter to the judge. Not the polished kind Rebecca would submit, but a raw one from me to him, spilling every fear, every hope, every reason Lucas was my world. The next day, I called Ms. Clara, Lucas's teacher. Her number saved from our last parent-teacher conference. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright. Hannah, I've been thinking about you. I took a breath and asked for her help. Can you put together a portfolio of Lucas's work, his projects, his grades, anything showing he's thriving? She didn't hesitate. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. That boy's a star, and you're why he shines. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the edge of doubt. As I hung up, I felt a shift inside me like a fire catching on dry wood. Margaret had tried to break me to paint me as less than, but I was done letting her define me. I looked at the cards from Pastor James, already imagining them filled with words of support, and my notebook where my letter to the judge was taking shape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control, a strength I hadn't known I had. Lucas's courage had lit the way, and I was ready to follow it. The week before the next hearing felt like a marathon. I was running on fumes, but I wasn't stopping. Lucas's courage in that courtroom had cracked something open in me, a resolve I hadn't felt since the early days of motherhood, when I'd rocked him through sleepless nights, whispering promises to keep him safe. I wasn't just fighting Margaret anymore. I was fighting for the truth of who I was as his mom. Every step I took now was for him, and for the part of me I'd let doubt erode. I started attending a parenting class at the community center, not because I thought I needed it, but because I wanted the judge to see I was willing to grow. The room was filled with other parents, some court-ordered, some just trying to be better. Our instructor, a kind woman named Diane, taught us about routines and emotional check-ins with kids. I took notes, my pen flying, and practiced her tips with Lucas, like asking him to name one happy and one tough thing about his day. Happy! I scored a goal at soccer, he said one night, grinning. Tough. I miss Grandma, but she's kinda scary now. His words stung, but I hugged him, promising we'd figure it out together. Sarah came through in a big way. By midweek, she'd collected a stack of letters from our coworkers at the hospital. Nurses wrote about how I'd bring Lucas to staff picnics, his laughter lighting up the room. Dr. Patel described me staying late to finish charts so I could take Lucas to the zoo the next day. Even the cafeteria lady, Miss Rosa, added a note about how Lucas always said please and thank you when I brought him to grab a snack. I read each letter at my kitchen table, my eyes misty, feeling a warmth I hadn't in months. These people saw me, really saw me, and it gave me strength to keep going. I also reached out to my neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, a retired librarian who'd watched Lucas a few times when Jenna was unavailable. She was in her 60s, her apartment smelling of lavender and old books. I sat on her floral couch, explaining the custody battle over tea. I need a letter, I said, my voice steady. Something about how Lucas is when he's with me. She patted my hand, her eyes crinkling. I'll write you a novel, dear. That boy's happy as a clam with you. Her promise, so simple, felt like armor. The church's prayer chain grew stronger every day. Pastor James texted me updates, 20 cards filled with messages, then 30, then 40. I picked them up after a shift, the stack heavy in my hands, each note a small miracle. One read, "Hannah, your love for Lucas shines like a beacon. We're praying for you." Another, from a woman I barely knew, said I lost my kids to a bad choice. "You're fighting for yours, and that's everything." I tucked them into a folder for Rebecca, my chest tight with gratitude. Then came Daniel. I'd avoided him since his weak testimony, his words still a fresh wound. But I needed him to step up, not for me, but for Lucas. I called him, my voice firm. "Meet me at the park tomorrow," I said. "We need to talk." He grumbled, but agreed. The next day, I sat on a bench watching Lucas climb the jungle gym, his giggles carrying on the breeze. Daniel showed up, his hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What's this about Hannah?" he asked, sitting beside me. I didn't mince words. "You let your mom tear me apart in court. You said I'm struggling, like I'm not enough. Lucas deserves better than that from you." My voice was low, but every word carried the weight of months of hurt. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "Mom's just intense." I shook my head. "She's trying to take our son, Daniel. You need to tell the judge I'm a good mom. For Lucas." He sighed, rubbing his neck, but nodded. "I'll do it. For him." It wasn't a promise I fully trusted, but it was a start. That night, I sat at my desk, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. I finished my letter to the judge, my handwriting uneven from exhaustion. I wrote about the nights I'd stayed up sewing Lucas's Halloween costume, the mornings we'd danced to silly songs in the kitchen, the way his trust in me kept me going. "I'm not perfect," I ended, "but I'm his mom, and I'll never stop fighting for him." I sealed it, my hands steady, and set it with the other evidence. As I stood, I caught my reflection in the window, my face worn, but my eyes fierce. I wasn't the woman who'd crumbled under Margaret's accusations anymore. I'd built something, a case, a community, a fire inside me that wouldn't go out. I walked to Lucas's room, where he slept, his chest rising and falling under a quilt I'd made him last winter. I knelt beside his bed, my hand resting on his, and whispered, "We're gonna be okay." The words were soft, but they carried a strength I hadn't known I had, a quiet vow that echoed in the stillness. The second hearing came faster than I expected, the courthouse looming larger than before, its stone steps cold under my feet. I walked in with Lucas, his hand warm in mine, and a folder stuffed with letters, school reports, and my own handwritten plea to the judge. Rebecca met us inside her eyes, scanning the documents with a nod of approval. "This is solid, Hannah," she said, her voice low. "You've built a case." I swallowed, my throat dry, hoping it was enough to keep my son. The courtroom was quieter this time, the air heavy with anticipation. Judge Thompson took his seat, his face as stern as ever, and I felt my pulse quicken. Margaret sat across the aisle, her posture rigid, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I couldn't read her, but the sight of her calm confidence made my stomach twist. Lucas sat beside me, coloring a picture of a sailboat, unaware of the stakes. I touched the wooden bird he'd carved at school, now tucked in my pocket, its smooth edges grounding me. Rebecca presented our evidence first. She handed the judge the stack of letters, her voice clear. "Your Honor, these are testimonials from Hannah's co-workers, neighbors, and church community, all attesting to her dedication as a mother. We also have a portfolio from Lucas's teacher showing his academic and emotional stability." She paused, holding up my parenting class certificate. "Hannah has taken proactive steps to strengthen her skills despite an already demanding schedule." The judge flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable, but I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. Then came Daniel. He took the stand. His shoulders hunched, his tie straighter than last time. Rebecca asked Mr. Carter, "Can you speak to Hannah's parenting?" He cleared his throat, glancing at me briefly. "Hannah's a good mom," he said, his voice steadier than I expected. "I haven't been around enough, and that's on me, not her. Lucas is happy with her, always has been. My mom means well, but she's wrong about this." My breath caught, a mix of relief and shock washing over me. Daniel had actually shown up for us in his own flawed way. Margaret's lawyer stood, his tone sharp but less confident. He argued the letters were biased, the portfolio irrelevant, but his words lacked the bite of the first hearing. The judge waved him off, turning to Margaret. "Mrs. Carter, do you have anything to add?" She rose, her voice clipped. "I stand by my concerns. Lucas needs more than Hannah can provide." But her words felt hollow, like a script she no longer believed. The judge's silence stretched, and I felt a shift, like the air itself was holding its breath. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his voice measured. "I've reviewed the new evidence. Ms. Carter, your efforts are commendable." The child's statement last time, combined with this testimony, paints a clear picture of a committed mother. My heart leapt, but he wasn't done. "However, Mrs. Carter's concerns about stability are not without merit. I need time to deliberate." My hope faltered, the room narrowing to his words. He was leaning my way, but nothing was certain. Rebecca squeezed my arm, whispering, "This is good, Hannah. We're close." But I couldn't shake the dread. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor, and walked out, her heels clicking sharply. The sound echoed in my head, a reminder of her refusal to yield. I looked at Lucas, still coloring his sailboat, now bright with blue waves. I wanted to believe we'd won, but her exit felt like a storm cloud lingering on the horizon. Back home, I tried to focus on Lucas, helping him with a puzzle on the living room floor. The wooden bird sat on the coffee table, its carved wings catching the light. I'd hoped the hearing would bring relief, but Margaret's departure gnawed at me. What was she planning? My phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was her. I hesitated, then answered, my voice tight. "What do you want?" "Margaret?" Her tone was icy. "You think you've won, Hannah? I'm not done fighting for Lucas." She hung up, leaving me staring at the phone, my chest hollow. The letters, Daniel's words, the judge's pause, they'd shifted the tide, but Margaret's threat froze me, her resolve a blade I couldn't dodge. Margaret's voice lingered in my head, sharp and unyielding, as I set the phone down. The apartment was still Lucas's puzzle pieces scattered across the floor, a half-finished lighthouse glowing in reds and blues. I stared at them, my hands cold, her threat wrapping around me like a fog. I'd fought so hard, gathered letters, leaned on my community, poured my heart into that letter to the judge. And yet her words made it feel like I'd gained nothing, like the ground I'd clawed back could slip away any second. The next day, my sister Emily arrived from Chicago, her suitcase thumping against the doorframe as she hugged me tightly. "You did it, Hannah," she said, her eyes bright. "You showed them who you are." I forced a smile, nodding, but her warmth couldn't reach the chill inside me. We planned a small celebration for Lucas, just the three of us, with pizza and his favorite chocolate cake. I wanted to mark the moment, to believe the judge's words meant victory, but Margaret's call kept me tethered to doubt. Lucas bounced around the kitchen, setting out paper plates, his laughter a stark contrast to the weight in my chest. Emily caught my eye, her brow furrowing. "You okay?" she asked, slicing the cake. I shrugged, busying myself with napkins. "Just tired," I said, but her look told me she wasn't buying it. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about Margaret's threat, not yet. I wanted this night for Lucas, not for my fears. As we ate, Lucas told Emily about his sailboat picture, his voice bubbling with pride. "I'm gonna be a captain someday," he said, waving a pizza crust. I smiled, ruffling his hair, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the courtroom, the judge's measured tone, Margaret's abrupt exit. Emily nudged me under the table, her foot gentle but firm. "Stay here," she whispered, nodding toward Lucas. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and joined their chatter, forcing myself to laugh at Lucas's silly captain voice. Later, after Lucas was in bed, Emily and I sat on the couch, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the street outside. She poured us glasses of wine, her eyes searching mine. "Talk to me," she said. I sighed, the truth spilling out Margaret's call, her vow to keep fighting. Emily's face hardened. "She's bluffing, Hannah. You've got the judge on your side now." But her words didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Margaret didn't bluff. She planned, she struck, she waited. The next morning, I took Lucas to the park, needing fresh air to clear my head. He ran to the swings, his jacket flapping, while I sat on a bench, the wooden bird still in my pocket, its edges worn from my constant touch. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah, checking in. I typed a quick reply, grateful for her, but my eyes kept drifting to Lucas, his small form soaring back and forth. I'd won the hearing, kept custody, but the victory felt fragile, like a glass I was afraid to drop. That afternoon, Margaret called again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was different this time, softer, almost pleading. "Hannah, I just want what's best for Lucas. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I gripped the phone, my voice low. "You don't get to decide what's best for him. I'm his mother." She sighed, a sound heavy with frustration. "You'll see I'm right someday." The line went dead, and I stood in my kitchen, the silence deafening. I walked to Lucas's room, where he was napping, his face peaceful against the pillow. The lighthouse puzzle sat on his nightstand, nearly complete, its beacon, a small promise of light. I wanted to believe we were safe, that my fight had secured us. But Margaret's words clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I sat on the edge of his bed, my hands empty, my heart heavy with a truth I couldn't voice. I'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over, and I was already so tired. Months had passed since the courtroom, and the sharp edges of that fight were starting to soften like stones smoothed by a river. I was 32 now, and the weight of last year felt less like a burden and more like a scar still there, but part of me. Lucas was thriving, his 7-year-old energy filling our small apartment with light. I sat at the kitchen table one Saturday morning, sunlight streaming through the window, sipping tea while he practiced his spelling words at the counter. "Courage," I called out, watching him scribble. He grinned, holding up the paper. "Got it, Mommy." I smiled, my heart full, but my mind drifted to the journal I'd started for him, tucked in my nightstand. I'd begun writing letters to Lucas after the hearing, little notes about our days, my hopes for him, the truths I wanted him to carry when he was older. It was my way of making sense of what we'd been through, of promising him I'd always be his anchor. I hadn't shown anyone, not even Emily. But each entry felt like a step toward healing, a quiet reclaiming of our story. That afternoon, I took Lucas to his soccer game, the spring air crisp and sweet. He darted across the field, his jersey flapping, chasing the ball with a focus that made me laugh. I sat on the bleachers, my hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. The other parents cheered, their voices blending into a warm hum, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the mom under scrutiny. I was just Hannah, watching her son shine. After the game, we stopped by the library, a cozy brick building with creaky floors. Lucas ran to the children's section, pulling books about pirates while I browsed nearby. I ran my fingers along the spines, the smell of old pages grounding me. A woman approached, her face familiar but hard to place. "Hannah Wright?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, cautious. "I'm Laura from church. I wrote one of those cards for your case. My breath caught, gratitude swelling. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. That meant everything. She smiled, touching my arm. You're stronger than you know. Her words stayed with me, a small gift I hadn't expected. Later that week, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Lynn, at a clinic near the hospital. I'd resisted for months, thinking I could handle it all. But the lingering shadow of Margaret's threat pushed me to try. Dr. Lynn's office was small, with a worn rug and a shelf of psychology books. She was in her 50s, her voice calm but direct. What do you want to carry forward from this, Hannah? She asked in our first session. I stared at my hands, the question heavy. I want to forgive Margaret, I said finally. Not for her, but for me. So I can let go. She nodded, scribbling a note, and I felt a weight lift, like I'd named something true. At home, I kept writing in Lucas's journal, my pen moving faster now. I wrote about the soccer game, how his grin lit up the field, and about Laura's kindness at the library. I wrote about Dr. Lynn, how her questions made me see myself differently, not as a victim, but as someone who'd built a life from the ashes of doubt. Each word was a stitch, mending the parts of me that had frayed. I didn't know if Lucas would read these letters someday, but they were as much for me as for him, a map of how we'd survived. One evening, I took Lucas to the community garden, a patchwork of raised beds behind the church. He loved digging in the dirt, planting seeds for sunflowers. I knelt beside him, the soil cool under my fingers, and watched him pat the earth with care. The garden was quiet, the hum of crickets just starting, and I felt a stillness settle over me. I'd spent so long fighting, bracing for the next blow. But here, with Lucas's small hands in the dirt, I could breathe. The fight wasn't over. Margaret was still out there, her shadow long, but I was learning to live in the light we'd carved out, one slow, steady moment at a time. The days grew warmer, spring folding into early summer, and I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Lucas and I had our routines, breakfasts with too much syrup, evenings chasing fireflies in the backyard. I was learning to savor these moments, to let them fill the cracks left by last year's fight. The journal for Lucas grew thicker, its pages a quiet testament to our life. Each entry a step toward the woman I was becoming, someone who could carry pain without letting it define her. Sarah invited us to a barbecue at her house, a sprawling backyard affair with kids running wild and burgers sizzling on the grill. I stood by the picnic table, a lemonade in hand, watching Lucas play tag with a gaggle of children. Sarah nudged me, her apron smudged with barbecue sauce. Look at him go, she said, grinning. You've built a good life for that boy. I nodded, my throat tight, her words sinking deep. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building piece by piece. Margaret's presence lingered, though a shadow I couldn't fully escape. She'd requested supervised visits after the hearing, and I'd agreed, setting firm boundaries through Rebecca. The first visit was at a community center, a neutral space with bright murals and plastic chairs. I sat in the corner, pretending to read a magazine while Lucas showed Margaret a new book about whales. She smiled, her hands gentle as she turned the pages, but her eyes flicked to me, often guarded and cool. I kept my face neutral, my fingers tracing the journal in my bag, its weight a reminder of my strength. Lucas was quieter after his usual chatter subdued as we drove home. Did you have fun with Grandma? I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He shrugged, fiddling with his shoelace. She's nice, but she asked if I like my room here. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice steady. What did you say? He looked out the window, his voice small. I said I love it 'cause it's ours. I reached back, squeezing his knee, and let the silence hold us. He was mine, and no question could shake that. Lynn's sessions became a cornerstone, her quiet office, a place to unravel the knots in my heart. One day she asked me to describe my anger toward Margaret, not in words, but in a color. I closed my eyes, picturing a deep, bruising, purple, heavy, and thick. "It's fading," I said, surprised by my own words. "Not gone, but softer." She nodded her pen still. "You're choosing what to carry, Hannah. That's power." I left that session lighter, like I'd set down a stone I'd been clutching too long. One Sunday, I took Lucas to the lake near our town, a glassy stretch of water framed by willows. We spread a blanket, ate peanut butter sandwiches, and skipped stones across the surface. Lucas laughed when his stone sank, splashing us both, and I joined him, the sound of our joy echoing over the water. As he hunted for the perfect rock, I pulled out his journal and wrote my pen, scratching softly. I wrote about the lake, how its calm reminded me of us, now steady even with ripples. I wrote about forgiveness, not as a gift to Margaret, but as a door I was opening for myself. When Lucas flopped beside me, cheeks pink from the sun, I closed the journal and looked at him. His eyes were bright, unburdened, and I saw the boy he was becoming, strong in ways I hadn't been at his age. I'd fought for him, but he'd fought for me too in that courtroom, with a letter that changed everything. I tucked a stray curl behind his ear, my touch light, and felt a quiet truth settle in me. We were enough, just as we were. As we packed up the sun, dipping low, I glanced at the lake, its surface catching the last light. I didn't need Margaret's approval, or Daniel's, or even the judge's to know my worth. I'd found it in the small moments, Lucas's laugh, the journal's pages, the choice to keep going. I folded the blanket, my hands steady, and walked with Lucas to the car, the world around us soft and still, like a breath held before the exhale. A year had passed since the courtroom, and I was 33 now, sitting on my porch in the early morning light, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. The Ohio air was thick with summer cicadas humming in the distance, and Lucas was inside, still asleep, his schoolbooks stacked on the counter for the new year. I'd started waking up before him, carving out these quiet moments to think, to feel the weight of how far we'd come. The fight with Margaret felt like a distant storm. Its thunder faded, but its lessons etched deep. I'd taken up gardening, a small act of faith in slow growth. Behind the apartment, I'd cleared a patch of weeds and planted tomatoes, basil, and a row of marigolds, their orange blooms bright against the earth. Lucas helped, his small hands patting soil, his chatter about worms making me laugh. Each sprout felt like a promise, proof that even after a harsh season, something could thrive. I'd water them at dawn, the hose's soft spray a rhythm that steadied me, a reminder that I could nurture even when I doubted myself. Work at the hospital had shifted too. I'd moved to a steadier schedule, fewer doubles, thanks to a promotion to shift supervisor. It wasn't glamorous, more paperwork, more meetings, but it meant I was home for dinner most nights, sitting across from Lucas as he recounted his day. We'd started a tradition of drawing together after homework, our pencils scratching out clumsy sketches of animals or spaceships. His giggles when I messed up a giraffe's neck were worth every late night I'd spent studying for the role. I wasn't just providing anymore. I was present, and that felt like a victory. I'd also begun volunteering at the community center, helping with their after-school program. It started as a way to give back, to thank the place that had hosted Margaret's visits without judgment. Now I led a reading group for kids Lucas's age, watching their faces light up as they sounded out words. One girl, Mia, reminded me of myself at 8, quiet, watchful, carrying too much. I'd slip her extra books, my voice soft, as I told her she was doing great. Helping her felt like healing a part of me, the part that had once felt unseen. My relationship with Margaret had settled into a fragile truce. She saw Lucas once a month, always supervised her visits, short and polite. I'd watch from a distance, my hands in my pockets, ready to step in if she crossed a line. She didn't knot anymore, but her presence still stirred a quiet ache. I'd stopped expecting her to change to see me as enough. That wasn't my burden to carry. Instead, I focused on Lucas, on the way he'd hug her goodbye, but run to me after his trust unwavering. I'd kept up with Dr. Lynn, though our sessions were less frequent now. In one, she'd asked me to name something I was proud of, not as a mom, but as Hannah. I'd paused the question unfamiliar. "I'm proud I kept going," I said finally. Even when I thought I'd break, I didn't. She'd smiled, her eyes crinkling, and I'd felt a warmth spread through me, like I'd claimed something true. I wasn't the same woman who'd trembled in that courtroom, and that was enough. One evening, I sat on the couch, flipping through a photo album I'd started for Lucas, its pages filled with snapshots from the past year, him holding a tomato from our garden, us grinning at the county fair, his gap-toothed smile on the first day of second grade. Each picture was a marker proof of the life we'd built, not perfect, but ours. I closed the album, my fingers lingering on the cover, and looked out the window at the fading light. The world felt still, like it was waiting for me to exhale, to let the past rest, and step fully into the now. The summer stretched on, and I found myself walking slower, noticing things I'd missed before, the way the neighbor's dog wagged its tail when Lucas waved the coolness of the porch steps under my bare feet at dusk. I was learning to live without bracing for the next blow, to trust the quiet we'd earned. Lucas was growing fast, his questions sharper, his laugh louder. One night, as we sat on the floor sorting his baseball cards, he looked up and asked Mommy, "Are you happy?" I paused, caught off guard, and saw his eyes wide and searching. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my voice soft. "I really am, and for the first time in years, I meant it." I'd started taking evening walks alone just around the block. The hum of crickets, my only company. Those walks became my sanctuary, a place to untangle my thoughts. I'd think about Margaret, about the woman I'd once loved like a second mother, and the one who'd tried to take my son. I didn't hate her anymore, not really. Her actions came from her own pain, her own need to control something in a world that had slipped from her grasp. I couldn't change her, but I could choose how much space she took in my heart. That choice felt like freedom, hard-won and fragile, but mine. Emily invited us to her place in Chicago for Lucas's 8th birthday, a big family gathering with cousins and balloons. I watched Lucas tear into his gifts, his joy infectious, and felt a pang of gratitude for this messy, loud tribe we belonged to. Margaret was there, invited by Emily, her presence a quiet test. She sat at the edge of the group, her smile polite, and handed Lucas a wrapped book about constellations. "Thought you'd like this," she said, her voice tentative. I nodded, offering a small thank you, and felt the air shift, not warm, but civil. We weren't friends, and maybe we'd never be, but we were here sharing this moment for Lucas. That was enough. As the party wound down, I stepped outside, the city lights twinkling against the night. I leaned against the porch railing, my breath visible in the cool air, and thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, scared, doubting, fighting to prove my worth. I didn't need to prove anything now. The lesson wasn't in winning the custody battle, though that mattered. It was in learning I was enough, not because a judge said so, but because I'd chosen to believe it. That belief had carried me through the darkest days, and it would carry me forward no matter what came next. The deepest truth I'd found was about love and limits. Loving Lucas meant fighting for him with every fiber of my being, but it also meant setting boundaries, saying no, even to someone I'd once trusted. It meant forgiving Margaret, not for her sake, but to free myself from the weight of resentment. That forgiveness wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, like closing a door softly, knowing I didn't need to open it again. It was a gift I gave myself, one that let me breathe, let me live. I want to hear from you now. What's a moment when you had to fight for someone you love, or maybe for yourself, and found a strength you didn't know you had? Share it in the comments. I'd love to read your stories. If this journey resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to join me for more, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, for being here with me. Here's to finding our way one step at a time and to carrying our light forward. Take care.